This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
When we put these episodes together, sometimes I'm looking for cases that I don't think will be mentioned elsewhere. And sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. But this particular case, it was over kind of before it began. But it's still the kind of case where it should get some level of attention just so people know that it's happened. And that's what we're talking about here. It's interesting because it was sort of doubled down on with other news this week that I'll talk about a little later, where it just got completely lost in the news feeds.
It's October, and October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And we try to, I think last year we covered a series of cases. This year, we've sort of been doing some other stuff. But I sort of want to talk about a domestic violence case. It's not one that's got a lot of information out there yet. But what's so interesting about this case was, in my opinion, there are a lot of similarities to the case of Gabby Petito, except it didn't get that media buzz. Gabby Petito, I guess, was missing much longer, so that allowed that case to build. But this case, which is, for all intents and purposes, it's out of Vermont. The couple is out of Vermont. They lived in Essex Junction. And this is the case of Emily Ferlazzo.
That's interesting. I've seen it compared to Gabby Petito's case, and sort of right off the bat, to me, the cases are not very similar at all.
Well, they were both living in a van.
Well, I understand that part of it, but Emily Ferlazzo, she was married. She was with her husband. Gabby Petito was with a boyfriend, right? To me, it's different. And it, am I right? Well, I don't know. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying, you say it's similar, which I've seen without the overwhelming. And the reason I feel like the media coverage was different, if you'll remember, when you first saw Gabby Petito's kind of blurbs in the media, it took several days to gain traction. I would say maybe 4 days. Days. Okay. Well, this didn't even have a chance to get to 4 days because she wasn't reported missing till Monday.
By the time we picked up on Gabby Petito, she'd been missing for a while too. So you're right. Not just in the reporting stuff. By the time we really heard about her case and what was going on, it was September 11th. She hadn't been seen since late August sometime. Right.
Well, that's really confusing now, too, because of the way that the autopsy report indicates. She probably died, before some of the supposed sightings of her. It's very confusing. I'm not exactly following the case because nothing is really happening at the moment. So I haven't really reconciled the coroner's report with what I had read previously about her being seen and talking to family up to a point, because the coroner's report stating she had been deceased for 3 to 4 weeks based on her autopsy kind of blew that out of the water. So that's it. When things like that happen, you really don't know what to believe anymore, because if you've got her mom saying, well, I FaceTime with her on this day, and she gives the date, but that date would be a conflict with what the coroner is saying the time of death approximately would be, what do you believe at that point?
Well, it's pretty. Yeah, I looked at it and I realized it was closer than I realized. Like it's within a day or two. But if you go all the way back to 4 weeks, it's not even close. Like that's a week earlier from the last time she was talked to.
I don't know what to think of it. And then if, I feel like the mother, I mean, at least after it's questioned, I would go back and look and see, like, okay, when did I actually talk to her? Because there's records of things like that on phones and such. I would clarify that. But if you start getting into this territory where the coroner has said she was dead before she had the conversation with her mother, then you have to question, like, well, do they know what they're doing? Is her cause of death correct? Like, that's how I see it happening, because, everything, there's typically coroners or medical examiners, they have reasons for making the decisions that they make. And I respect those because I'm never going to be a medical examiner. I have no desire to look at dead bodies. When I get it that typically there are indications of things and that's what they go off of, but I wouldn't put anything at 100%. I would say some of them are really high. Like if there's water in someone's lungs, then, they were alive when they went into the water, right? Right. That kind of thing. Those are pretty high. But you have to wonder, and I'm not saying that this medical examiner or coroner or whatever you call him, the person who's responsible for her death investigation, I'm not saying that they're doing anything nefarious or wrong. I'm just saying, I hit sort of a roadblock when I heard that more than likely her body had been out there for longer than was expected. Yeah. And then you're going, well, all of this is just useless.
Well, I don't know if it's useless or not. I know that a lot of the
how do you decide what
side,
to use then?
Well, that's what I was about to say.
Okay, go ahead.
A lot of the legal side, unfortunately, in that case, and this is one of those things. It's part of it is jurisdictional, but part of it is because of the passage of time, and that's a small passage of time that happened where they were basically. With Brian Laundrie disappearing, it's very difficult to prosecute a case like this. And I've heard different pundits in various true crime sources, for a while there, it was in the feed constantly, just because I do check out a lot of true crime stuff. And the groups that I visit or frequent were sharing a lot of information about it. But a lot of the pundits were saying things like, they're definitely going to indict him for murder any day now. And that's not true because you don't know where to indict him yet. That's the first thing. And even where her body was found was right on the cusp of two different, very, very different types of jurisdictions. One being basically a very small county with very few residents. The other being federal land. And they were able to indict him on the misuse of an access device, the debit card, which even that could be probably with a good defense attorney could explain that more than likely. What happens in that case, as far as what you trust, you do have to trust the science as far as they have a good record in that area, meaning that particular national park, of being able to utilize local anthropologists and other types of forensic science, including entomologists, to determine a rough time of death. It's not, that's another one of those things. It's not like it is in the movies or television. But I do think it's close enough that they could determine the cause and manner of death to some degree, particularly with a strangulation. It's very difficult for that to be an accident or a suicide. It could be, it's definitely not a natural death, but it could be that it's a, crime of passion, meaning something more second degree.
Right. But so her manner of death is homicide, correct?
Right.
It's been ruled homicide.
She's a homicide by strangulation.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she was strangled. And it was strangled by somebody's hands.
Yeah.
As opposed to, something not alive, accidentally strangling her.
Right. It wasn't some situation where somebody got a cord caught or anything like that.
Well, see, you say that, and I hear what you're saying, but to me, I need some sort of clarification. Like, I need to know, because whatever I looked at, it wasn't close enough for both situations to be right. And to me, if you can make a mistake on, like a big mistake on time of death, especially since if you put out a 3 to 4 week situation, knowing that the mom FaceTimed with her and that contradicts it, I feel like you may not be looking at the entire case for what it is, as opposed to just going with what you're finding.
Oh, I mean, I see what you're saying there. Overall, the more complicated thing for me is that this case is rapidly becoming something that can't be prosecuted. Speaking specifically of the Gabby Petito case.
The only reason that he hasn't been charged with murder is because they don't have the evidence to charge him without interviewing him.
And see, that's what I sort of was going to say. Like, my overall feelings on that case is nothing can be done with it. One, until he's found, but two, until he fills in some holes in the story, either through a lawyer or an interview / interrogation. But they're finding him is going to be the only way that they get that whole story. And even then, you're relying on somebody telling the truth, and that's just not going to be a thing.
I think that's where it matters what investigators get a hold of him, which investigators get a hold of him, as opposed to his willingness to participate, which he has. If he's responsible for this crime, or even if he's not really, he has no desire to participate, obviously.
Yeah, I actually think the next thing that we'll see, in my opinion, and I don't know, this is just me sort of throwing something out there. I think they'll actually prosecute one of the parents, and I think it'll be the mom. I think what they'll do is they'll charge her as an accessory after the fact, assisting in a fugitive escape justice. So I think, depending on the timing of when he actually left, which I figure they're focused in on that right now, and any material aid that was offered to him in terms of money or electronic devices or supplies, I think they will end up attempting to prosecute a parent. That's what I think they'll do. And the main goal of that won't be the actual prosecution or justice for Gabby Petito. It'll be to flush Brian Laundrie out. The idea being they prosecute and heavily publicize one of his parents to get him out, because they may have, it looks like they have some evidence that they maybe had knowledge of what was happening, or that he was about to flee.
Can they really do that if he's not been charged with murder? Because you see where that kind of gets out of control? They can.
No, it doesn't get out of control. It's very simple for a prosecutor that's charged with conspiracy related to the charges that he has been.
His girlfriend's body was found?
No, conspiracy to commit access device fraud. So
how would they have conspired with that? How's that work?
Any number of ways. He flew back on the 17th of August, or he flew back mid-August.
That's another thing that's so confusing to me. I don't understand that whole situation.
He flew back to move stuff, something related to a storage unit or one of their residences in a storage unit. So when he did that, and then he flew essentially home, and then he flew back out to meet her again. That's been part of the timeline since the very beginning. I'm not saying the charges make sense. I'm telling you what I think the prosecution's ideas of finding Brian Laundrie will be. I think that will be what they do next. I think sometime before the end of the year, they'll levy a charge of some kind of conspiracy against one of the parents. And once they do that, it could just be aiding and abetting a fugitive from justice. I don't know how that would work timeline-wise. I'd have to look up a lot of peculiar statutes.
I hope that they do charge somebody, but I don't see that happening.
Well, I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. I'm saying that is my theory as to how that case goes forward. I did notice an interesting article about this case that I wanted to mention to you. that's sort of the opposite of that. This came out in the New York Post, so take that for like with a giant grain of salt. They said that overall, the manhunt and all the tips and everything that they've been doing related to Brian Laundrie has brought a discovery of 5 people. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, like sort of. I don't know that I read the same article that you are reading, but go ahead.
So there was a man named Dosu Calderon who had been stabbed to death. I want to say this is the guy from North Carolina. Do you know about this? He was found like on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and there were like rumors that it could be Brian Laundrie.
I haven't been following this case, so I sort of know a little bit about what you're saying, but
this is okay. So there was a guy found in the Blue Ridge Parkway dead.
Okay.
And for like a day or so, people were saying that it was Brian Laundrie.
Okay.
Or they were saying it could be Brian Laundrie. So the authorities came out, and it was actually a guy named, his last name is Calderon. His first name is Josue. So I had said it Josu. Someone corrected me and said I was saying it wrong, but then didn't have an alternative. So Josu or Josu Calderon, he'd been stabbed to death. He was found on the Blue Ridge Parkway.
And he was a missing person?
Supposedly he had been reported missing and then he was found. They didn't release a lot of information about his case. This is a 33-year-old guy. It's not Brian Laundrie. It's just a body that was found on the Blue Ridge Parkway. That was an area it was rumored he would go, and he had been there. Brian Laundrie had been on the Blue Ridge Parkway and the Appalachian Trail before. I don't think people understand the difference in the two, but Gabby Petito had actually lived in North Carolina down by the beach at one point. The second case was Robert Lowry. He was discovered not far from Gabby Petito, but he was ruled to have committed suicide. He was a dad from Texas.
He had gone missing like just a little before her, I think. And
yeah, it wasn't.
He attributed him being found like largely to the fact that they were looking for Gabby.
Right. Sarah Baynard she was 55 years old. Her body was found off a highway in El Paso County, Colorado, which was an area where Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie had been and taken photos of. They had taken photos at Monument Rocks on July the 4th, and that was the same day that Sarah Bayard or Baynard, Bayard, had been reported missing.
So did you say Sarah? Has she been found?
So Sarah has been found. She was found in the same area Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie were on. So she was found later, but she was reported missing the same day. They were like all in the same area on the same day.
Is she alive?
No, she is deceased. Lauren Cho, she was a New Jersey chef that had been missing. And supposedly interest in Petito's case also led to the discovery of her body. She was found out in California in the Yucca Valley Desert region. She had been missing since June 28th. And then additionally, there was a body that was found near a dumpster in Mobile, Alabama on September the 20th because Brian Laundrie, he was being looked for. He had been reported possibly being sighted in Mobile, Alabama. And we started off this case with the Moab double homicide of Kylan Schulte and Crystal Turner. This case it's got an interesting reach, and it's definitely got a big ripple effect. The Gabby Petito case does. And ultimately, if Brian Laundrie did this, then, it'll turn out to be a case of domestic violence because they were living in the same van.
Oh, yeah. I feel like, no question, this is going to be domestic violence. And I feel like if he has not committed suicide yet, the only reason is because he chickened out.
I don't dispute that notion. I don't really know what he might have done to himself.
I'm interested to know more about her actual time of death, or some sort of reconciliation with that. And then just his behavior is, to me, it's indicative of somebody who, I mean, because what kind of life is it to like go on the run? Like, what kind of life is that based on the life he was having? I mean, I feel like he probably feels really guilty about it, but I could be wrong. I've always imagined that. So in domestic violence, it's violence basically within a home or within a space you occupy with somebody else. And so, when you're living with somebody that you're in a relationship with, especially when you've gone outside of your family. So you've got, familiar relationships where you're blood related to the people you live with. And then, you could get married, or you could just have a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, and you cohabitate with them in a space. It just so happens that I don't know how long Emily had been in their bus that they had converted, but it was said that they were staying at an Airbnb. So I don't know. There hasn't been a lot of information released on that. Have you seen?
No, not yet. I was waiting for a timeline, but
okay. Now what I do know is, but so with domestic violence, it's somebody that you're with by choice, and there's violence that erupts. And I've always felt like, in the situations where somebody ends up killing somebody else, the majority of the time, I feel like it's possible that there's not a whole lot of history of domestic violence, because it's sort of like if the person erupts and they kill the person, right? It's an eruption. And what I mean by that is like it's a build over time, because you're with somebody cohabitating and then you lose it, right? But in situations where typical domestic violence, which we're not talking about like homicide here, we're not talking about people dying, we're talking about husbands or wives getting beaten by their significant other on a regular basis. That's, typical domestic violence. And in those type of situations, I feel like it is more level. Like, even though it's bad, it's level bad. Like, you see what I'm saying?
You mean like from the perspective of expectations? Like you just
what
to expect.
It's rarely a situation where the woman like gets punched repeatedly, or the man gets punched repeatedly, and then their spouse escalates it to the point of killing them. And you shouldn't ever put your hands on anybody. And if anybody's putting their hands on you, then you need to get help and get out of that situation. In the situation where you've got a volatile relationship, but like they're letting out little bits of steam here and there, okay, which is not okay, but I'm just saying it's way more likely that they're going to be angry and get over it until the next time they're angry than in these situations where you see this escalation to the point where they choke their wives or husbands or whatever. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, like from the perspective of like logical thought, I follow you, but also like I don't necessarily. They define all these patterns and behaviors, and they being the courts, social services, various voluntary agencies, and not-for-profits that deal with domestic violence. But it's like a pattern of behavior in any relationship that's used to control like one partner by the other. That's like one thing. We saw a huge spike of domestic violence situations during the pandemic because of people being trapped in close quarters together. So there were a lot of like public service announcements, I guess, a lot of advertisements for people in my area where they were basically, putting up resources. I agree with you. But at the same time, I want to just caution that like some of these situations, because of exactly what you're talking about, and I think the other part of this is you get it spot on, the violent behavior can come out of nowhere, and it doesn't necessarily mean you will or will not have a pattern beforehand. So I don't want to say...
I think that most domestic violence murders, not all, I think it's like this eruption. I mean, even if there was a pattern, because... I don't want
people to think that just because they see something, they're safe.
No, not at all.
So, like,
But
So
I'm thinking
it
to
could
myself,
come out of a pattern of behavior. It could come out of like a couple of times where it results in an eruption, and it could come out of absolutely nowhere.
and I think that the cases where the women or men die ultimately from at the hands of their domestic partner, I feel like those are the ones that come out of nowhere. And there's a couple of factors to that. For one thing, they're not expecting it. Okay. And so it's, if you are in I'm saying this from my own experience. I would not stay in a situation where somebody was putting their hands on me. But if I was in that type of situation, I would be on alert, right? Okay. You'd be expecting it to an extent. If you're overpowered, that's one thing. But typically it's somebody, why do people hit other people? Because they feel out of control. They're mad at something. They want to take it out on somebody. They have the emotional maturity of a 5-year-old. That's why people hit people, right? Am I wrong on that?
No, you're not. You're not wrong. I think I have a different view of it than you
Okay,
do.
go ahead. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, what you're talking about is pretty middle of the road. Where domestic violence, like if you were to measure like domestic violence, where the danger comes in is not in the fighting or even in the abuse, because it's very difficult to discern what is happening between two people that you can't see in terms of the sequencing of how they put their intimate relationship together. So I don't think that we see what is going on, but I do think that probably the most important thing that you see is related to what you said, and that is control. When someone is attempting, for ever how they do it, for whatever reason, to control another person, I think that is probably the biggest sign that the situation you're in is possibly dangerous, because those eruptions we're talking about, that's related to when that person is going to feel out of control or like they need to be controlling a thing. But the difference in the situations that you could measure, the thing that you could measure, is when one person, whoever it is a threat to the other person, period. Because that's not a relationship anymore. The power balance becomes so great that literally one person's either freedom or their life is threatened by the other person.
In that situation, though, if we looked at things that way, it would severely skew who could have healthy relationships.
How so?
Because you would constantly have to, if an eruption could come out of nowhere and you don't stand a chance physically against your partner, then looking at it that way it would skew relationships.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. So
I'm just saying that in situations where, for one thing, if a lot of times in domestic violence situations, it's never just one side. Okay. It's always two-sided, and I'm not getting onto victims at all here, but a lot of times there's a volatility that goes back and forth that escalates the situation, right? And because, I mean, if there wasn't an escalation of emotions, who would ever hurt someone in their family? Nobody. I mean, you don't hurt them because you want to hurt them. You hurt them because you're out of control, right?
I think that would be the vast majority of people. I do think there's people that do things for money and people that do things out of...
In their family, though? I mean...
Yeah. It happens
how could you... What... Like, I guess I just don't see how, like, domestic violence could be, like, something that would lead somebody else to getting money or whateher.
Insurance. Wills, inheritances.
Okay, but isn't that different than domestic violence? That's insurance fraud.
You didn't. You didn't say domestic violence there. You said
No, I said hurting a family member.
Right. So my point is, like, there are some people on the planet that hurt family members, and it is not related to being out of control. It's the opposite.
Well, that is in and of itself a control situation, but it's a different situation.
Yeah.
And so, so having this escalation between two people, because, there's always a choice. Let's say that I'm in a volatile relationship and that I am experiencing bad behavior from my domestic partner. Well, I have a smart mouth, and I'm not saying that it makes it my fault, but if I push the person to the limit and I keep on going, that's the choice that I've made. I could choose to not tolerate it and not say anything in return, right? Not dignify it with a response, which that rarely happens in volatile relationships. You have to respond. That's what keeps the relationship going. And it's not healthy, but it happens. We're all human beings. And so anything that's happening between a couple can be worked out in a way that doesn't involve one of them dying, right?
Yeah. The death part is an anomaly itself, although it happens more frequently than it's not minuscule. But
and so, what do you think the factor between working it out a different way and not working it out a different way and it resulting in the death of one of the partners?
One of the largest factors is maturity, and I don't mean age. I mean maturity.
But in the moment, what is it?
Anger.
Yeah, right. And so I would say, without taking into consideration the 5 million underlying factors that could be there, on its faces, love and hate, they walk a line. And in order to hate someone or to lash out against them, to feel anger towards them, usually you have to love them to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Because things that are just neutral can't instill those types of feelings in you because you just don't care. So it's really hard because if you love someone, you are also capable of hating them and being really angry at them. And I think that's the answer to all of the times that things get worked out in a way where one of the partners dies is just an eruption of anger. That's not to say that there's not situations where people plan to kill their spouse specifically, but I wouldn't call that kind of thing domestic violence, really.
Yeah, it's just murder.
It's just murder, and it's just and if it was analyzed close enough, which I don't know, I'm never going to do the analysis, but I would say that if you plan a murder and kill someone that you say that you love, you never really loved them to begin with. That would be my take on it, without some sort of
you can't analyze that anyways, because you have to wade through that person's lies to get to.
And I know that. I'm just saying, I feel like a murder, someone setting out and completing a murder, it's not possible for someone to do that when they really love someone. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible for somebody to snap, because that happens all the time. That, in fact, I would say it's the majority of domestic violence murders are just somebody snapped. In this particular case, so Monday, Emily, you want to take a crack at that last name?
Ferlazzo? Yeah.
Okay. Emily Ferlazzo, she was reported missing by her family after her husband, and they got married last October, from what I can kind of tell. She's early 20s and he's early 40s. So there's quite an age difference there. I did see sort of some comments, not really on social media, but maybe on articles that I was reading, that what was she doing married to a guy that could be her father? which kind of, I don't know that, I don't necessarily have a problem with that age, like the 22 and 42 or 44.
I think it's 41 and 22.
Okay, so
years.
40. So I don't necessarily have a problem. I'm not saying the 19-year age difference. I'm saying that particular set of ages. Now, what did they have in common? I have no idea, but they're old enough to make their own decisions, right? In that. But so they had just been married. From what I could see, it was around like the beginning of October last year. So about a year. Right?
Yeah,
So maybe they were on their anniversary trip. I'm not sure.
This could be an anniversary trip for sure.
Okay. And so they had been traveling in their mobile bus. So from what I can gather, this transportation was substantially bigger than what Gabby and Brian were in. Additionally, allegedly, they were staying at an Airbnb.
Right.
And Emily's husband, Joseph, he told her family that on Saturday, they had gotten into a fight while they were riding in their vehicle and that she had exited the vehicle. He had gone up to a convenience store and then he had turned around and come back and she was gone. And so by the time, that's weird for one thing. I don't know what the area is like in Vermont where they're at because they weren't near where they live. Actually, I don't know if they live in their bus or what the deal is.
Well,
but
the area they were in it's called Richmond, Vermont. They were basically at a ski area.
Okay, and so they were staying supposedly they were staying in an Airbnb, so they weren't like necessarily living in their bus.
Not full time, no.
But I imagine they, traveled. But I don't know if like when they go home, they like drive the bus home and like they park it and then they're home.
I have read different accounts where the details are kind of fuzzy on that. I couldn't tell you for sure.
Right, and this case is like it's just unfolding, but it's also like got a bow on it already.
Oh yeah.
So so Emily's disappearance, as recounted by her husband, was strange. He wasn't. She got out of the bus, and I just want to say this: like, anytime. I'm going to say 95% of the time. So most of the time, more likely than not, if a guy and a girl are on a trip and the guy ends up with the vehicle and the girl supposedly got out in a random place, that did not happen.
No, not unless he's just a complete asshole, and then you probably have already found her.
Well, and I'm just saying because it's highly like a guy worth his salt.
He's going to be the one walking, is what you're saying. He's
going to be the one walking, and you're not. I mean, who puts somebody out on the side of the road? You just ignore them if they're bothering you. I get that that's a maturity difference, but. We've heard about, Brian driving off without Gabby and trying to get away from her and all this nonsense. But ultimately, and I guess Brian just couldn't get away from Gabby fast enough. But in this situation, Joseph would have stopped the van or the bus or whatever it is, and he would have just went for a walk. Like if the story were true, right? Which, we already know it's not true at all. But that's just, anytime I hear that, I mean, I guess there could be some sort of rare situation where that would be the case. But I would say in a situation where somebody exited the vehicle, it's almost always going to be the guy. And I would say the woman would most likely be with the vehicle in a benign situation.
Well, so there's another part to this story. So the police already had the bus. They already knew where the bus was. So the bus had been identified as being at a friend of theirs' home.
I thought that was the dog.
The dog was there too, but they had already identified the bus. But that's where I was headed before you just threw that out there. So here's the other part of this is there's a dog. And the weirdest things that I've seen is that people don't leave their dogs places. If you're like this, if you're traveling, like this is like if you're taking your dog in your like basically what they had was like a short bus. They had a short bus that they converted to a camper. Do you know what I mean by a short bus? Like it's not a full-size school bus. It's like half the length.
It just sounds like that's going to be the start of disasters. Like no matter what conversion has taken place, it's just not a good idea. But go ahead.
All I was going to say was if somebody walks away one from the other in that type of situation, then they take the dog.
Well, absolutely. Dogs love to go for walks.
Yeah. So they had this vacation rental. I don't know what they were doing up there. They have their bus at the vacation rental, but the bus and the dog are found at someone who's supposedly a friend of Joseph Ferlazzo.
What was he in when they found him?
He was standing in a convenience store. The Vermont State Police the state police detective that found him, he didn't mean to find him. He was just walking in to pick up some items to go with his lunch, and he saw him standing in the convenience store, and he said, "Hey, are you such and such?" And Joseph admitted he was Joseph Ferlazzo, and he said, "Look, the police want to talk to you. Can I take you over to the barracks so they can talk to you?" And Joseph Ferlazzo agreed to go with him. The first question was, well, why weren't you looking for your wife? I'm sure. They take him in and they start talking to him. They know where the bus is. The bus is parked in St. Albans, which is at a house where it's believed to be owned by, like I said, one of Joseph Ferlazzo's friends. So then they end up searching the vehicle, and inside the vehicle is Emily. So she's in the camper vehicle.
He confessed to it before he told them she was in there.
I'm not.
That's what I read. I couldn't possibly have made that up.
No. I'm not purporting to state the order of events, but that was the order of how they released the information.
Well, he basically immediately confessed, and he said her body's in the bus is what I read, and I can send that link to you. But
I believe it.
He wasn't trying to the reason he wasn't looking for his wife was because he knew exactly where she was. Now it gets hairy because he did lie to her family.
Yeah.
And he lied to them in such a way that they thought it was suspicious. I don't know at what point he told them that versus what point they called the police, but we know that 4 days transpired. So Saturday and Sunday, she was killed early Saturday morning in their bus by him. That's what he has stated. That's his side of the story. And so, Sunday went by, and then by Monday night, she had been reported missing by her family, like her parents or a sibling or somebody. I'm not sure exactly who, but not by her husband. And then by Tuesday afternoon, they had found, because at first the dog was missing as well, which, that's never a good sign. And when they found him, it wasn't long at all before they were releasing that they had found her. And, I was thinking to myself, so you sent me the case as soon as it was we knew about it before they had found Joseph and before they had found her body. So we knew she was missing.
Yeah, I get alerts to state police activity in that area because, so where all this is happening is very close to, where the
couriers lived.
Right. If you Google this story, you'll notice that where they were versus where they lived versus where they found the dog, some of these places in here pop up again and again, and the Israel Keys story, because this is right around the couriers.
Right. And
so I got a press release stating that it wasn't even a silver alert or anything. It was just suspicious disappearance or something. And I shared that
she
with
was
you.
a missing. I mean, she was a missing person, like for a small amount of time. Here's the thing, though. I feel like this type of case would have like gone all the way through, and I never would have known anything about it because it was such a quick turnover.
That's one of the reasons I grabbed it, was because I was like, wait a second, because him confessing like he did, or whatever has happened there, where they know what's happened. And they started with first degree murder. That may change. It could turn out to be a second degree murder or manslaughter or something like that. But he got it all out of the way pretty quickly, which is unusual.
Actually, I don't think it is unusual.
What, to admit to where the missing person is?
Well, I think what would be unusual is if he marched himself directly to the police station afterwards, right?
You're right. Yeah.
I feel like this type of situation is like he was just, and he wasn't even absconding. He was standing in a convenience store. I bet he just didn't know what to do, probably. I mean, I hate to, like, just kind of putting myself in his position. What he did was terrible. However, I feel like no matter what, even if he is charged with first degree murder, I don't think that he ever, I don't think he woke up that morning and he was like, I'm going to kill my wife today. I think it's got to be an escalation from a legitimate problem that like every couple has at some point in time. And it's something, because think about it. If you kill your significant other in a fit of rage, what's the very first thing you feel afterwards?
Oh, you got to feel guilt.
Well, you would feel regret.
Oh, regret for killing them, you mean?
Yeah. Like you didn't want to kill them, really.
Yeah, and you're right. It may not even be that they are. It may not even be that they feel bad that they're not alive anymore. It's that they feel bad. I mean, depending on the personality type they are, they feel bad that they did it. They feel bad they killed them.
Right. And like they can't take it back, right? I mean,
no, you can't.
And I've always wondered, especially with domestic cases, how many people would, if they could, undo it. And maybe it's my naivety about it. I would say that like 99% of them would take it back.
Because I think it would be a high percentage that would take, like, you hear the whole crowd of people who say just get a divorce or just leave them or whatever.
But that's not, you don't get to plan these types of killings out like that.
Not usually.
It's not a situation where like the alternative was divorce. The alternative was to not continue this argument. That was the alternative.
Well, the alternative was to realize as a 40-some-year-old man that the likelihood that you're going to be able to keep up for very long with a 22-year-old woman needs to be very carefully vetted. And you need to determine your personality type on a basis that has nothing to do with your physical attraction or like whatever you're thinking in that moment. Because I know like one or two successful couples that have this kind of age difference in them, and they all met around the same time, like the 20 and 40-year-old people. Because I don't think I think the reason that is because it would be really weird if you're 14 and met a 34-year-old, or if you were 34 and met a 54-year-old. Like this particular type of couple, I don't think everyone can do that. I don't think every person is built for that.
Are you saying that the differences is what like led to the volatility?
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you it this way. Do you know many like 20, 21-year-olds right now?
No.
There's you have one in your life that I was thinking of. She's 26. She's 26. Okay, so she's old. Okay, that's a good measure then. So think about her for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And now imagine her with somebody my age.
Yeah.
How weird would some of that be? Just think about like what you see on social media and stuff that is different between the two ages.
I can't, to me, I could see where the age difference, I don't see where they had anything in common, but that's none of my business. Just a typical like 20 something and 40 something year old. What on earth do you talk about? But maybe they had something. I don't know. I think it has very little to do with the age difference. But
I'm just saying,
depending on what, came along with the age difference, like you said, if she's, a young, vital girl who's, out of his league to begin with, and she continues on, it would make him angry, right? But it's not angry like I want to kill you angry. It's like I want to hold on to you type of anger.
right? That's more where I'm headed with my commentary. There is, I don't necessarily think that I'm not saying he made bad choices, because clearly they've been together a year or two, and
I don't know how long they've been together. I know she had just moved there earlier in the year, so I was thinking maybe they had just met in the springtime and then got married in October. That would be kind of fast. I mean, but
end of the day, that type of age difference, it can escalate things faster when you really have nothing in common, and also there can be sort of a parent-child type relationship happening between that type of age difference, because people are saying he's old enough to be her father.
But I guess my problem is that I feel like a 40-some-year-old man should be mature enough to handle a 20-some-year-old girl.
Well,
and that's where I guess maybe his life experiences come into play, and what is he? I don't know much about him.
You know what? I thumbed through his social media, just stalking him for a minute to see what he was up to. He didn't strike me either way. He didn't strike me as somebody who was super mature. He didn't strike me as someone who was super immature. He struck me as someone who's now in prison.
Yeah. But did he look like somebody on last Wednesday? Did he look like somebody who was going to be in prison for murder next Wednesday?
No, he was out snowboarding and playing with his dog.
Because to me, and it really depends on the experiences you've had. Because if you are just, I don't actually know anybody that has made it to middle age without. Actually, maybe I do, but without some sort of major thing that kids or being married or whatever happens where you have to go, oh, wait, I'm not the only person in the world, right?
How deep did you dig into this case?
Emily's case?
Yeah.
I feel like I dug as far as I could.
Well, you said I'm not the only person in the world. What if I told you he's not the only person in the family?
That has killed somebody?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't dig that deep.
Okay, so this is from the Times-Herald. This is an article from October 29th of 2009. It had an update from this year, but it's from September 20th. I didn't understand what the update was, but here's how this goes. It says, details in murder emerge. Police and the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office are still investigating the Sunday night murder of an Upper Gwinnett woman as more details have emerged about the victim's family. Young Hee Lim Ferlazzo, 39, was found dead with multiple stab wounds in her apartment at the Willowwick apartment complex off of Sumney Town Pike in Upper Gwinnett late Sunday night. Police said that Lim Ferlazzo, and that's Young Hee Lim dash Ferlazzo, was reported to police by her husband, Joseph A. Ferlazzo Sr., who was interviewed Monday morning as cooperating with police. In May, Joseph Ferlazzo was managing a massage parlor business in Reading when two women were arrested there during a raid, according to a detective at the Reading Police Department in Berks County. We were investigating a couple of massage parlors in our area, and one of the parlors we investigated and actually made arrests out of, he was the person that leased the property and managed the business, said the detective, referring to Joseph Ferlazzo. The business was called the Osaka Therapeutic Spa, and two women were charged with prostitution. At the time of the arrest, Joseph Ferlazzo told police that one of the women was a relative of his wife, Young Hee Lim Ferlazzo. In late August, Joseph Ferlazzo appeared before Reading Zoning Board in an attempt to reopen the business, which had lost its permit as a result of that raid. Joseph Ferlazzo appealed the decision to the Zoning Board, saying legitimate massages were taking place. Police also testified, and his appeal was denied. Montgomery County District Attorney Risa Vitri Furman said Wednesday that her office was handling the murder investigation and was aware of, but would not comment on, any possible connection between the Redding business and the Upper Gwinnett murder. We have no comment about the specifics of what law enforcement has learned or believes at this time. We make appropriate public comments as the investigation continues. Upper Gwinnett Police Chief David Duffy said that Joseph Ferlazzo was interviewed Monday by Upper Gwinnett Police and he was cooperating with them. Duffy said the UGPD would consider the Redding incidents as part of the investigation, but declined to comment further and said any additional information would likely come from the DA's office. So, I'm not saying any charges were filed in that.
I was going to say, was he charged for that?
It's still unsolved.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting that that was related. So I came across that. But I was actually trying to, and other people are catching on to this now that I Google search it, but I was trying to search for criminal record for Joseph Ferlazzo. That's where I was headed.
And it came up that she had died.
Yeah. And I just thought that was interesting that at first I was like, is this his... Like, I didn't calculate 2021 versus 2009 in my head, right? It was late when I was looking at this. And I was like, wait a second. Is that his first wife or something? But then I realized that he's junior and the other one is dad. So I thought that was interesting.
Right, but it doesn't look like dad is charged with it.
No, I'm not saying that he is. I'm just wondering, like, I wonder if this will be one of those things that makes a lot of other things suddenly come to light about people. I found it interesting that dad was running a massage parlor. And so that woman...
That article really, like, it's kind of weird because it really goes off course. Doesn't it?
Well, have you ever heard of that case before?
No, I haven't. But what I'm saying is, like, I expected there to be more information about that, but instead they sort of veered a different way.
Oh, well, I went digging deeper.
Am I wrong?
I think it's worse. It's just a mystery. And nobody ran with it at all.
Well, I can see where, like, the police have said they have no suspects. And, like, that would mean... Because the Joseph Sr. is the one who called the police when he found her dead, right? And so he would be the first... He would be having to be eliminated.
Right. And this is so we're clear, this is a 12-year-old murder. This is 12 years ago that this occurred, 2009. So, that's weird for both of them to have lost their wives, like to murder.
Do we know for certain that this is his father? I mean, it seems like it is to me. I'm just wondering. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to look a little more into that, but yeah, that is interesting. Well,
to clarify and answer your question and cover my ass, I don't know for sure that it's his father. I was assuming because of the name and the proximity.
We haven't said anything except Joseph Sr.'s wife was fatally stabbed to death in October 27, 2009, and we're making the assumption that the senior and the junior are related to one another. It could be a completely different family, whatever. That would be, also coincidental. But yeah, it seems weird to me. They've had no breaks in the case. It doesn't look like, but that makes me wonder. So how old is Joseph Jr. in 2009?
Oh, that's where I knew you would head with this. He's going to be 29 years old.
Right.
Well, you were saying all these things about him snapping. I just wanted to point out that there's another murder in the family if these guys are related.
Well, right. And I would imagine, and she was stabbed to death. So that's a rage killing. Like, cause it takes quite a bit of, rage. I don't know what the right word. I just imagine like a stabbing would be very physically demanding. Maybe not. Maybe it's because my perception of it is how much work it would be, but I'm not a guy, and maybe it's like no work for a guy. I don't know. for me, it's like a ton of work.
I imagine that putting a knife through skin and whatnot is work.
Well, not to mention you've got the person like moving and like whatever else is happening. And to me, it's not like you just walk up and you shoot somebody, right? Which
Right.
would also be, a difficult task mentally. But to me, like the act of getting close enough to someone to kill them by stabbing them to death, it's a lot. And, now if you're in a fight with somebody and you stab somebody, that's kind of different. But when you are, that to me, it seems like that's one of the hardest ways to kill somebody.
Well, I think strangling is a hard way to kill someone.
Yeah, and that's especially with your hands. But it's also something that apparently happens quite a bit. Now, Gabby Petito was strangled. Now, I will be interested to know if Emily, what her cause of death is. And it will be very interesting if she was stabbed to death.
Yeah.
Especially based on the other circumstances.
So let me ask you this. If that woman turns out to be stabbed to death, do you stand by this not being premeditated just on the face of it, or you think it has to be looked into?
No, I stand by it. I feel like if she's stabbed to death, then I feel like he's lost his temper twice.
That is so interesting to me.
Do you not think that?
So is a guy that loses his temper 3 times and kills 3 people a serial killer?
No, not in my opinion.
Interesting.
Is it in yours? He's just an asshole, basically. You got to learn to control your temper.
I don't know. I get kind of weird with how I view serial killers anyway. I don't necessarily think that people have a really good idea of what serial killers are, but I don't think this is it. I mean, he could be, but that would be the weirdest way to exercise that particular urge to kill, like, your
serial killers are not
stepmom?
going to be killing their stepmom or their wife. I don't think.
No,
like ever.
Not predators, I don't think. I mean, I don't know how that would. I got to think about that because there's Ed Kemper, and he killed like his mom and his grandma and like her friend. I mean, he killed his grandfather.
He also had enough other victims though.
He almost existed twice, like once as a rage killer and once as a serial killer. Right. And then he comes back around to the rage killing when he,
that's an interesting case, but he is most definitely a serial killer. Keeping in mind that based on like what he has said, he had a very odd relationship with the people that he killed. But because he's the serial killer who killed his grandfather because he didn't want his grandfather to know he killed his grandmother, right?
Right, but he was a teenager when he did that.
Right, but like that happened, he was caught and they put him in, like a home to be rehabilitated or whatever, right? But he got out because he was a juvenile.
Right.
But his reasoning, though, his grandmother, if I'm recalling this correctly, his grandmother was like, me, and he just he couldn't take it any longer and he shot her. And he was like, yeah, there you go, bitch. Like, that's what he felt like I think he was 14 and he had just had it. But then his grandfather came home and he opened the door and his grandfather was standing there and he shot him, and he felt really bad about shooting his grandfather. But his reasoning was that he couldn't bear the disappointment that his grandfather would have towards him and having lost his wife, not to mention the fact that he is responsible for the loss of his wife. And it's almost like he like killed him to spare him.
Yeah.
And that's really strange. But, and especially for a 14-year-old, like what the hell? It's crazy.
Ed Kemper, man, that story alone, that would be like a good, interesting miniseries to do. But it's not much of a mystery to his story because he just talks. He's like, yeah, I'll tell you what I got going on.
Oh, yeah. And he's like, I do need to be here. And it's his story. I feel like I do feel like he's a serial killer. And I feel like he gives a good outline as far as some of the things to look for. Now you're right, he does kill family members. I don't necessarily think that he was a serial killer when he killed his grandparents, right? Like, I don't know
He
that
was 15 years old. He was just an oversized oaf at that point.
I don't think that he could have developed. So yeah, maybe that's a thing. Maybe like some of the earlier killings of what become serial killers could be their wife or other family members. It just so happens that he was a child when he did it, and he was caught and convicted and served time for what he did, but he was let out.
Right.
Which is like a testament to like why that probably shouldn't happen. But our justice system is very
well, he was a child, so even today it would be difficult to deal with him.
Right. But yeah, that's kind of hard to see. That's a whole different. I mean, did we make a serial killer because he was like, I get away with it? And he was a big guy, though.
Yeah, like, if you look at so you know how like Michael Myers and Jason and all of those like slasher movie guys are like big, slow moving monsters,
right?
Ed Kemper was that.
No, I know, yeah.
And he did the disturbing things to bodies too, like ripping heads off and things like that. So, when he first was arrested, he was 6'5" tall. That is, I mean, then so they let him out when he turns 21, and now he's 6'9" tall.
Right. And he didn't have any sort of meaningful anything in his life. Like he was nervous around girls, and like his ability to pick up hitchhikers and ultimately kill them, that is what kind of put him at ease, that is like straight up serial killer right there. He was nervous around girls, except when he was offering them a ride. And with the plan specifically of killing them. So, I mean, it's a really messed up thing going on in his head there, no question. But in these domestic violence type situations, I think that you'd find spree killers more often, maybe. I don't know. A spree killer is where somebody kills somebody like...
Yeah. They go a mini mass murder, you mean?
Yeah, like if somebody takes out their whole family, like, the family annihilator, those type of people, I don't think they're necessarily serial killers. I think maybe a serial killer might do something like that. But when you're thinking about, especially, I'm not sure that we're going to find any like solid connections between Joseph and, the history that we've sort of looked at, because he didn't abscond. He like immediately turned himself in, and he immediately confessed that. And those are signs of remorse. Maybe. I mean, I guess I could be wrong, but I imagine him like,
or he's just too lazy to flee.
I mean,
it takes like you said with Brian Laundrie, it takes a lot of effort to do whichever he did, whether he offed himself in a way that he couldn't be found. That takes effort.
The problem I have with that is I don't feel like his parents would have assisted him in offing himself.
No, I don't necessarily think that would be the case either.
And that's the only reason I think there's a chance he might still be alive. Because I can't imagine any parent assisting with that.
Well, I still think he might have bolted. I told you, I thought, so the area where he's in, if you were to head south and east of there by a couple of miles from where everybody's been searching down in Florida at this place called the Carlton Reserve, which they've just opened back up to the public, he would be on a waterway.
Right. So his entire life was Gabby.
Yeah.
Okay. And she gave his life meaning. He was not much without her. And I don't mean to say that in a mean way. I'm trying to say it in more of like a factual type statement. So she was probably out of his league. I felt like they made a nice looking couple, but as things kind of unwound, it seems like, maybe she was out of his league, but he was, enamored with her. And he killed her. So what is he going to be doing in fleeing?
Nothing. Like it's not like that's why I think he killed himself.
Well, that's what I've thought all along, because like, how does he even live with himself after he's lost her? Because everything in his life
Revolves around her. Yeah.
and so, being on the run is really difficult. Now, perhaps his parents recognized that, and that's why they assisted, even though they knew he was probably going to commit suicide. But it's a tough thing to do when you're not. I just don't see him mentally like being in a place where he would be even wanting to survive. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've misjudged all of it. And, that my thoughts on this case, they come directly from all of the body cam footage that was available. And it's the interactions that Gabby and Brian both had with the police in, I believe, Utah. And I got my perception of this situation from watching, the 2 hours of those different cameras, right? That's
Right.
all we have, really. And then, looking through social media, like, Gabby was like the light of the world, according to, everything you see. And then he was just really lucky to have her.
This is like, I walk a really fine line with this stuff because nobody's the light of the world.
Well, but I'm just saying in the past revered sense.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But like Ed Kemper, that we've somehow managed to work into Brian Laundrie and Joseph Ferlazzo, and possibly Joseph Ferlazzo Sr. So with Ed Kemper, he killed his grandmother and then his grandfather. He killed his grandfather to
Spare him.
keep him from knowing that he killed his grandmother.
Right.
He killed his grandmother because that's who he lived with and had an argument with, right? So he's 14, 15 years old, and he doesn't live with his mother because his mother was not good. Like there were a lot of bad things going on in the world related to like how she was
unfit.
Right. They're not formal diagnoses, but then, in 1973, he does bring it back around to domestic violence and he kills her. To end it all, he kills her friend. So where I get into strange territory with past revered and people who are the light of the world is I understand that some people have that X factor and they're more memorable than other people, but also you have to remember that for every person that's the light of the world, you have a person who's the dark of the world, and sometimes they suffer the same fates.
Right. Well, I wasn't trying to elevate her, like, as far as, a sense of humanity. I'm just using it from the point of view that the escalation between the two of them, especially since she knew that she was his world, like, she knew he would tolerate a lot. Okay.
So you think it might have been some of her actions that assisted at leading them down the path where ultimately
there's no question. There's no question. And I'm not saying it's her fault. And that needs to be very distinguished. But I'm not saying anybody who's murdered by somebody else, they're a victim of murder. Okay. Yeah. But the way that I sort of saw this all kind of playing out, and like I said, the body cam footage of, right after the incident, one of the incidents that occurred a few weeks before she was killed, I saw a situation where if you had told Gabby what she was doing was going to lead Brian to snap and strangle her, that she would have been genuinely surprised and she would have stopped. And I think that if you told Brian that in a couple of weeks, this whole situation's going to happen again, except you're going to lose your temper and you're going to strangle her, he would have said, there's no way that's going to happen. Except it did, because, things escalated. I'm just saying, like, if you feel like you're in the power position in a relationship, you can feel like you can get away with more than you really should. And the other person may tolerate it, but that doesn't mean it's okay. And it also doesn't mean that they're complete. You can count on them never reacting. It's just like any other domestic situation where you've got two people that fight, and one person takes it, they take it, and they take it, and they take it, and then they shoot the person in the head, right? So they never fought back, and they thought, well, I can just beat up on this person, until it gets to a point where they can't anymore because the other person has had it.
If you feel like you're in a situation where you may have experienced domestic violence and you or your partner could be a threat one to the other, you can dial 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 7233. That's 1-800-799-SAFE, 7233. Or you can text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 88788 for resources to help evaluate your situation with someone who can help you get a third-party perspective on what's happening. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
So that other news that we were talking about after we recorded, they confirmed that Brian Laundrie's remains had been found. And so that sort of ends the Gabby Petito case, because there's nothing you can do now. They'll, as I mentioned in the episode, they'll go after the parents at some point, I'm sure. Originally, I thought they'd do that to flush them out, but now I think they'll do it in the name of the public, which is bizarre when that happens. But it's one of those cases that will never have an ending now. It's really sad.
Newborn day and that still warm glow. Life's in long lost times ago. Close my eyes so I can see the light. Time stands still while the sun goes round. Distant winds making silent sounds. Daylight waiting to come relieve the night. So let it shine, 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 shine on me. Let it shine, 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 shine on me. Where the footprints stand, roads ahead under scarlet sand. Twilight reaching like angels through the sky. Feel my moment and breathe it in. Search for skies that begin and end. Close my eyes so I can't see the light. So let it shine.